Hi, and welcome back to the fourth and final part of session 20 of History of Healing. So we'll start off talking about some influence of some non-naturopathic pioneers in what we would call alternative or complementary healthcare that have had a lot of influence on naturopathic practice in some places. So first we have Rudolf Steiner, who you might have heard of in the modern day context of the Steiner schools, which are becoming quite prevalent through the Western world. He was living around the same time as Benedict Luz, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he was an Austrian who developed a system of medicine called anthroposophic medicine. So he developed this system in the 1920s, and it was slightly later than naturopathy. And this system defines spiritual and physiological philosophy quite differently to naturopathy, but the treatment methods used in this system of medicine overlap quite a bit. So philosophically, it's different. From a practical perspective, it's got quite a lot of commonality to naturopathy. And one of the kind of cool things about this system of medicine is that it really maintains the European historical roots of medicine that came from alchemy and from astrology. And so it places a fair bit of importance upon these things as important factors in how we might practice medicine from a philosophical perspective, and also things like diagnostics and the way that the treatments are manufactured, etc. Then Weston Price, he was just slightly later but also the late 1800s, early 1900s, a dentist from Canada who traveled widely around the world and studied a lot of native cultures and their diets, and looking at the impact of the type of diet on the health of the teeth and the mouth, as well as looking at overall health, which he connected in, as you would, very readily looking at diet. And he had some pretty strong ideas about theories regarding processed grains, sugars, and fats, and their impact on overall nutritional status. And his theories, as well as Steiner's, persist in practice today amongst different types of healthcare practitioners. Some even medical doctors practice according to these philosophies. And you can find information on either of these systems of medicine by looking on the internet these days. There's lots of current resources. I think the Weston Price is the Weston Price Foundation or something along those lines. But if you Google, you can get more current information about these. So we won't belabor the United States for too long, but we are going to take a little trip around the world now and look at how naturopathic medicine is looking in the modern world these days. So in a number of states in the U.S., naturopaths are licensed as primary care physicians, including drug prescription in a number of states. They have a relatively broad scope of practice, including some forms of minor surgery, like stitching up wounds that don't go down into the muscle, that just involve the layers of the skin, as well as things like treating hemorrhoids and other types of minor surgery, IV therapy, as well as the prescription of most drugs, which I just mentioned. Also doing invasive physical exams like pelvic exams, for example, for women. It is illegal to practice naturopathy in South Carolina, Tennessee, and Florida. It sort of flip-flops back and forth. You never know what you're going to get in Florida. And you can actually be arrested for practicing naturopathy in South Carolina and Tennessee. And all other U.S. states, other than the ones that have licensure or these illegal states, naturopathy is unregulated. It can be practiced by anyone, including those who graduated from correspondence courses, as long as the practitioner doesn't step over the line into practicing medicine without a license, which means not diagnosing or directly treating disease, but doing just general healthcare support. So there's some similarity there to Australia in terms of the complete lack of regulation, but naturopaths, I think, in Australia have a greater scope of practice than in the unlicensed states in the U.S. In Canada, naturopathic doctors are licensed in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Alberta. And BC is the only province that allows naturopaths to prescribe drugs, so the practice is more traditional in those other provinces. In the UK, naturopathy is very loosely regulated, although there is registration for naturopaths. It's taught primarily at osteopathic schools as an adjunct to osteopathy. So generally, naturopathy in the UK is an add-on specialty for medical doctors, osteopaths, and chiropractors, as well as nurses. So it doesn't tend to be a standalone practice. In the rest of Europe, there's a wide variety of different regulatory frameworks, and there are too many countries in Europe for us to go into all of them. There's just a lot of variability. An example, in France, it is illegal for a naturopath to practice without medical supervision. And in Germany, the generic name for a natural health practitioner is Heilpraktikers, and there are about 10,000 of these in Germany. And what they do is quite an overlap with naturopathy, but they're not called naturopaths. In India, naturopathy has been regulated since the late 1960s. The training there is a 5.5-year bachelor's course, which includes yogic sciences and acupuncture, so it's a big combo there. And regulation of naturopathy is also grouped with yoga in the regulatory framework. So this is an interesting thing here. Naturopathy has taken a much more traditional trajectory in India, and for example, hydrotherapy is really a core part of naturopathy in India, whereas that might not necessarily be true in lots of other parts of the world. And there are your references. That's the end of our final part of this lecture. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you in your next lecture. Bye now.